Well, I just posted a video that was that I just took last summer as I was driving to work, uh, just kind of showing some of my travels. I found those places interesting, and so I thought maybe some of my subscribers would like them too. Uh, and I started to get, as soon as I posted, I started getting comments from a user who I don't recall ever really seen before, seen any videos from or getting comments from. Uh, I'm assuming that they're a subscriber because they posted a comment within just, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes of me putting the video up. Usually that requires someone to be a sub, although I guess it's not technically necessary. Uh, and uh, he didn't, assuming it's a he wasn't from the United States apparently. Although where exactly, I'm not sure. I'm assuming somewhere in the UK because he mentioned spending time in Australia, but he's apparently not Australian. So unless he's from New Zealand, he's probably, and while he mentioned the driving on the side of the roads is weird, so he's probably not Canadian. He's probably from the UK, although I don't know that for sure. Maybe Scotland, maybe Wales. His name says Welsh in it, so maybe he's Welsh. I don't know. Anyway, he made a comment in a PM that was basically completely unrelated to the video. He was talking about Obama, and he says it seems like Americans really love Obama, and are Americans just stupid? And um, well, uh, despite the fact that it had nothing to do with the video, that's an interesting question because I think the most interesting thing about Obama and his politics is not that he's half black, or it's not that he's kind of socialist, because that sort of thing we've seen plenty of times. What's the most unique about him that I can tell is the degree to which he's popular. He's extremely popular in a way that polls aren't really even going to show. There's an enthusiasm for his person that is unprecedented in my lifetime. Now, when I've gone and I've asked people who are quite a bit older, they will say that it's not unprecedented in all history, that the nearest thing, though, would be to say JFK. And I kind of doubt that because I think there's a lot of ex post facto popularity for JFK because he got assassinated, and so that just, for some reason, gives you more credit or whatever, but it increased his popularity. His dissenters are unwilling to, since there's a taboo of speaking ill of the dead, his dissenters were basically silenced, and of course there's no reason for them to badmouth him once he's dead because he's dead. But that's the only thing people who lived long enough to know about that period have said, well, it's sort of akin to that. But I can definitely say in my lifetime, and I remember the elections going back to Dukakis, not very well, that one. That was the 88 election. I don't remember that well. I remember it happening. And with every subsequent one after that, I remember more and more candidates, some of the issues, but never anything anywhere close to the enthusiasm for Obama among his supporters. However, there's an interesting inverse that among his opponents, there's that much more vitriol, and I think that's actually related to his popularity. Why is he popular? That is a really interesting question that I don't have an answer for. First, to say, are Americans stupid? Americans are not any more stupid than people in other countries. As much as I disdain the amount of ignorance the average person has about politics, I mean, I don't mind people who don't know about things that they don't pretend to have a worthwhile opinion on. There's not many people who go around thinking they're Africa experts, but then again, there aren't many people going around thinking we ought to do things in Africa, all this recent Coney 2012 stuff aside. There are quite a few people who think that they know how the economy should work and how the government should work, and who don't know anything about it. And that's annoying, but I don't think that's unique to America. But just to say people are ignorant doesn't really speak to why Obama would be popular, because there isn't any real evidence that in the recent past, anyway, there's been a great reduction in or a great increase in the ignorance of American people. I am interested in the idea and I think leaning towards the perspective that at some point in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially earlier in the 19th century and later in the 18th century, that there was a much greater political awareness within the American electorate than there is today. There seems to be a lot of evidence for that. I don't know if it could actually be proven, uh, but it hasn't been that way now for quite a while, and this I think correlates well with public schools. I'm tempted to say it's because of public schools, but I don't want to say that because I don't think I can rigorously prove that. But definitely throughout the 20th century, for sure, the American electorate was a lot more, I don't know, susceptible to foolish ideas than previously. Uh, and in that sense, I don't think we're especially more ignorant in 2008 than we were in, say, 2000 or 1990 or 1970 for that matter, and or 1940 or 1930. And so I don't think ignorance can explain Obama's popularity, because the level of ignorance, if that was the reason he was popular, then any number of other presidents would become also popular. And there's always a degree of partisan enthusiasm for whoever the candidate is. There's a tendency to say, he's our man. The talking heads on TV or in the past in the press would probably come up with endearing character stories about the candidate on why they're a worthwhile person, why they're respectable, why they should govern. And that happened with Obama, but to no greater extent than anyone else. In fact, Obama had such a thin resume that there was actually a lot less to go on with him than most other people. I mean, Bill Clinton, at least he'd been governor. And I will say, Bill Clinton is probably the president who got me on the path where I am now because of the things he did that I thought were evil. But what I will say is Bill Clinton is a genius. Bill Clinton is a very, very smart man, and he could be one of the most skilled liars that I have any firsthand. Not that I've personally met him, but contemporary people that I've ever seen. Watching him speak on television is really incredible, and I think he's a far better liar and a far better speaker than Barack Obama is. And yet, he was never he was a popular president, and there's still a lot of Democrats who kind of like him, but he never generated anything like the enthusiasm that we saw for President Obama. And I'm happy to say that enthusiasm has waned slightly, but not that much. There's still quite a few people who are head over heels, totally enthralled with the man, and I don't know the reason. I think there are a couple different factors. One that I think only is a partial answer, because I don't think it explains all the enthusiasm, but at least some of it, is there is a narrative within the mainstream political culture of the United States of a progression of history kind of idea. And there's a couple different tenets to this. One is that the government gets bigger every year, and that's good. The progress of society can be charted by increases in government power, and that's to be expected and also to be lauded as beneficial and good. But there's another one that's the kind of the race relations one, where the progress of history is marked by not only government involvement in the economy and in society generally, but also in milestones, and especially black history. So, I mean, in more recent decades, this has been expanded to include absurdly diverse and sometimes even mutually exclusive group of people: Latinos, women, gays, transgender, Syrian. I mean, when I was in college, I had to learn about the Jewish immigrants and the Syrian immigrants and the Greek and the Italians. And when it was all done, they basically have subdivided every single person in America into some minority that has been oppressed to some degree or another, but blacks especially. And the history here is, look, here's the first black person to be a scientist, here's the first black person to get a doctorate, here's the first black person to go to school, here's the first black one to be elected, here's the first one to vote. And history is kind of portrayed as, look at now we're getting better and better. And Jackie Robinson, I mean, Jackie Robinson is I think, somebody who, unless you're really interested in the history of baseball, you should basically be unaware of. And yet he's somebody that everybody in America knows who he is, because that is part of this narrative. And Barack Obama, obviously, despite the fact that he's half white, he is perceived as black, he is thought of as black, and he basically, in that line of thinking, represents or manifests the pinnacle, the apogee of that, or the terminus of that historical trend. That he's the climax. That's the most powerful, important person in the country. He's black. That's a major milestone. And while he was running among people, some of whom were black and some of whom were just very liberal whites, viewed him that way. And to them, it really didn't matter what his policies were or weren't, or anything about his personality. The fact that you could get a black president was so momentous in their mind that it was something to be totally dedicated to and enthusiastic about. And so that explains some of it, but not all of it, because not everybody felt that way who felt into him. Now, the other narrative that I outlined there, the growth of government, he fits within that narrative, but not in an extraordinary way, and actually in a less extraordinary way than a lot of people. As far as his first term has gone, he has done less to increase the government than any number of other presidents. In fact, I think he's probably not really any more than Bush. He's on track to surpass Bush if he goes a second term, and it depends on the rubric you use, but I don't think there's any argument that he's done more than, say, FDR or Wilson or LBJ. I guess we could find ways to jerry-rig it, but it hardly is as dramatic as them. But he fits within that trajectory of increasing government, and he promised, he was more explicit about it, I think, than some of the previous candidates who ran. Clinton actually wanted to pass the universal health care, and it didn't work, but he was never so overtly radical about it. Not that Obama is that overtly radical, but he's vague enough that if you want to project your radicalism on him, you can. And that's another part that I think is part of his enthusiasm, but again, I don't see how he's unique in this, and that is the degree to which politicians don't really stand for anything but manage to be the wellspring of projections other people have. So people want hope, they want change. They say they imagine a universal healthcare system and cradle to grave and free education, and that's all the things that they want. And they just look at Obama, and maybe he never promises any of that stuff, or maybe he only vaguely alludes to it, but they imbue him with that, and since those are things they really want, they're enthusiastic about, they imagine him to possess those qualities or to be advancing those causes, and so they're very enthusiastic about him. He does that, and that's most evident, I think, in his campaign promise or slogan, which was change. That's extremely vacant, doesn't really mean anything that could mean anything, and while that's a brilliant kind of campaign slogan, it's hardly unique, and it happens with all the presidents. The people who vote for, say, President Bush or President Clinton, a lot of times, they're like your standard Republican who's gonna vote for Romney is not looking at Romney's policies and goes, yeah, that is actually the policy we really need. I've really thought about it, and that's the best policy. And then, well, this one, that's not the best policy, but that's an okay policy. And so on that, he's great. No, what they think about is they want someone to beat Obama. They want somebody who's going to restore whatever their views of the conservative idealism that they think exists, and who's going to prevent the things that they're most worried about. And it doesn't matter what Romney has said or done to indicate whether that's likely or not. They're just going to imagine that he's going to do that, and to some degree become enthusiastic about it enough to go and vote for him anyway. And I don't see how Obama is unique or distinct in that way, but maybe he's just a lot better at it. Maybe he was much more able to harness that kind of vague enthusiasm to his cause and to his person. Another element, definitely the media loves him. The media obviously has a left bias, and they'll cut a lot of slack to abhorrent politicians, uh, or represent them very well, which they did. I mean, they gave Bush a lot of slack, but they love Clinton too. But they really seem to have loved Obama, and maybe that's part of it. Although I can't be sure. He was really popular among the youth. I know the first time I ever heard about Obama was I was in college, and it was probably about a year before he got elected to Senate, or maybe when he was running for Senate. See, that would have been 2006. Yeah, it was 2006, probably, maybe 2005. And someone in one of my classes who was overt liberal, not someone I ever argued with, but I knew that was his view, and he just had a shirt that said Obama. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not the most attentive person to follow politics, but I know who the president and the vice president is. I know prominent members of Congress. I know the governor, and I don't know who this Obama character is. And it kind of stuck with me, and when I started to hear his name referenced, it really was a while before I realized what's the big deal. The guy at that point was in the state Senate of Illinois, so he wasn't even in a national elected office, which means he's on par with, you know, probably 2,000 other politicians. He's, in terms of the power elite, he's way far down on the list, not someone of national significance. Basically, every governor would be more significant than him. Every member of House and Senate, most of the main cabinet, all the major cabinet appointees, vice president, president, and a plethora of other people before you get to him. And yet there was kind of a I hate to keep using the same term, but just an enthusiasm or a gung-ho-ness about him, and I don't know what it was. I don't know where this guy got the shirt. I don't know how he got into him. It's possible that really left-wing organizations, like socialist organizations, were singing his praises, and that he came to people's attention that way, and so he had the attention and support of the very far left, preceding his takeover of the popular imagination in the broader, more moderate left. And that's what was kind of the spirit, to his point, that propelled him to the nomination. It'd be sort of like Ron Paul, except Ron Paul never got the media attention that Obama did, but Ron Paul's initial enthusiasm comes from really not moderate Republicans, not run-of-the-mill Republicans, not normal conservatives, but really very radical libertarians and very, very radical minarchists. That's who knew about Ron Paul first, and it was those people who kind of were the small seed of support that were able to get him a much broader base. And I think it's possible, although I couldn't delineate all the intricate steps, that Obama was the same way, except Obama had the explicit and enormous backing of the media once he started to go for national office. Something that Ron Paul has actually had the opposite, where he's been intentionally marginalized, misrepresented, and we've seen. And I'm not to say that Ron Paul would have an equivalent political career had he just had that one thing. No, it would have been still different, but I think they're slightly analogous in that sense. And so maybe that's why among the hard left now is kind of they kind of have had a bit of an intellectual conniption fit, because some of them have become basically his unapologetic shock troops who support everything he does and says, even more now, even more zealously than when he was running, and the other half have either become totally disillusioned or much more reserved in their support or openly hostile. But then those openly hostile segments are then ignored and marginalized in the same media. So I think the media is a crucial element here, although the exact nexus of why that is, I don't know. To an extent, it must just be ideological sympathies. They want what Obama says he's going to give. They like that idea. They like the idea of a black president. So they're going to give him more than a fair shake. On the other hand, Is there a more explicit kind of arrangement between them? I don't know. Likely, at least some of the time. There's certain papers and certain news outlets that I'm sure have financial interests or whatever through Goldman Sachs or through George Soros or whatever that have explicit policies of being pro-Obama, and they have an audience, and that can contribute to his enthusiasm. And they reported about his enthusiasm too. And I remember when I knew for sure he was going to get elected, as they started saying there have been these giant gatherings of people coming to see him, like 100,000 people, the media said. Maybe that was exaggerated, but to judge by the pictures, not too much. So there's that. The other two elements, I think, are George W. Bush and the collapse of 2008. Bush, it's still kind of close. I'm used to thinking of Bush as being the president. Was definitely a fascist, and he was somebody that the left really loved to hate. If you looked at like Reagan, even though there are lots of people who disagreed with him, and even though rhetorically he was more radical than Bush was, it was harder to hate him because he was very charming. He had a way with words. He had a way with being on TV. Not that he didn't make stupid blunders from time to time. And he didn't do anything nearly as fascistic as Bush did in hindsight, which is saying a lot because he wasn't the libertarian that some people like to think he was. But Bush was terrible. The wars were very unpopular, although that so that galvanized a lot of people to kind of look at Bush as some kind of devil, which is, I guess, is fair, but it's fair in the sense that sure, he's evil and whatever, but it's unfair in the sense that so are pretty much all the other politicians, and the blood of all those wars isn't just on his hands. Nancy Pelosi and Carl Levin and all the powerful Democrats, Dianne Feinstein, and indeed Barack Obama, to the extent that he was there, which wasn't that much because he didn't come till later, are also soaked in that same blood, but whatever. That was part of it. And so there was definitely a kind of a feeling of we need somebody new, and this guy was new because he didn't have a history really. And then the other thing was the collapse of 2008. That really got a lot of people very nervous, and it's the classic archetype that's most clichédly referred to in Hitler's rise to power. You have a big economic catastrophe, there's a lot of uncertainty, and somebody charismatic comes along and whips up a lot of support. And in a less dramatic and hopefully less analogous way, Obama was similar. There was a large financial bust, one much larger, by the way, than the media ever let on. Lots of people were out of work. There was all kinds of problems, as there still are. And it was very easy to say, well, let's go with something new, regardless of how similar policies of Obama may have been to Bush, and to become very enthusiastic about it. So I'd say a combination of all that and maybe even more that I'm not sure about or whatever. There might be some kind of... But like I said, it's weird because there's a corollary to this, and that is that for all the enthusiasm he gets, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of people who absolutely revile him and think he's the Antichrist. He's the first president I've known where there's a lot of people who actually literally thought he was the Antichrist or think he is the Antichrist. There weren't many people, even when Bush left office, who were willing to compare him to a fascist or a Nazi or a police state guy. There were some, and over the course of his 2 terms, those numbers of people slowly grew. And those people were kind of evenly split between the right and the left. Those extreme libertarians, extreme conservatives who supported Ron Paul, they were the ones who were the most vigorous in condemning Bush as a fascist. And that condemnation increased wildly after 9/11, so not when he first came into office. But as soon as Obama came into office, comparisons to Hitler, to Stalin, to Mao were commonplace, and there were certain members of the media who actually, I guess to their credit, fan these flames, especially Glenn Beck, but he wasn't the only one. And not only does this make people hate him, but also I think it does actually feed into the people who like him, because then they look at Glenn Beck and they think, I hate Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck's fascist. and Glenn Beck's is against Obama, so Obama must be the opposite. Obama must be the knight in shining armor that I really want to believe that he is, and so I believe that even more fervently now that I see that a whole bunch of Republicans are bashing him. So that's my take on it. I don't think it's because Americans are more stupid than anybody else. Obviously, there's a lot of ignorance that's necessary for anybody to support a man like Obama or not to realize the many, many similarities he has with, say, Bush or Clinton or whatever. But it's not ignorance alone. There's other deep psychological factors involved, and I think, well, that's what I think. And it's totally dark, isn't it? And so you've just been listening to me talk for the last hour. So, all right, that's it. If I can turn this off. Come on. There we go.